or Don't book group presented by the Center on Colfax and the Denver Public Library. I'm Rex Fuller, CEO of the Center on Colfax. As we begin tonight's program, we acknowledge with respect that the Center on Colfax stands on the unceded traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, Apache, Comanche, Kiowa, Lakota, Pueblo, and Shoshone nations. Further, we acknowledge the 48 contemporary tribal nations historically tied to the lands that comprise what is now called Colorado. We recognize Indigenous peoples as the original stewards of this land and honor their sacrifices and hardships. And we recognize that colonialism is a current and ongoing process. Before we start tonight's program, I thought I'd share a few thoughts about how this book event came about. The Center has strong programs serving LGBT youth, older adults, and the transgender community, and we're working on developing ways to expand the community we serve year-round. We also want to expand the conversation about LGBTQ experiences to include more perspectives. Books seemed like the perfect way to do that. We selected our first round of books with an eye to including as many voices as we can. But not everyone has time to read, so we tried to come up with a program where if you have read the book, this will be an interesting conversation. But if you haven't had the chance to read it yet, we hope you will find tonight's event interesting, and maybe it will inspire you to check the book out. I want to thank our partners at Denver Public Library who have made all these books available to everyone. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we are not able to gather in person, but we hope in the near future to be able to get together for these book events. But while we hope to make this an in-person event soon, we want to figure out a way to continue it as an online event so as we can make them available to as many people as possible. And we also hope that we can as we get more events under our belts and get better at producing these events, we can add even more books. All the titles in our series for 2021 are listed on our webpage, lgbtqcolorado.org/book-group. Tonight's book is I Can't Date Jesus: Love, Sex, Family, Race, and Other Reasons I've Put My Faith in Beyonce by Michael Arceneaux. I'm very happy to welcome tonight's panelists. Devin Cochran comes from Houghton, Louisiana, and currently works for the Denver Public Library. As a marketing and communications specialist, Devin sits on the board of directors of One Colorado. He enjoys queer literature, cooking, and asking lots of questions. And you can often find him at Cheeseman Park or eating at Pho 96. Thera Lee Marshall III is a native New Mexican who's lived in Denver for 12 years. He's the former Colorado HIV program manager for Planned Parenthood of the Rocky Mountains, and he currently serves as STI HIV VH prevention interventionist at Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. And Thera is a community member, activist, and friend. And Reverend Jasper Peters was born and raised in Denver, where both his parents served as pastors. He now serves as the lead pastor of Belong Church, a faith community that welcomes everyone. Welcome, all three of you. In addition, I'd like to thank the team at Denver Public Library, including Kate Burns and Casey Fazio, and from the Center's team, thanks to John White and Sable Schultz, and thanks to Kendra McNichol, the ASL interpreter for tonight's event. One more note, this event is live on the Center's Facebook and YouTube channels, and we will be available for viewing on YouTube after the live event ends. And as you're watching, if you have questions, please type them into the chat and we'll do our best to get to as many questions as we can tonight. And now, Devin, Thera, Pastor Peters, thank you all, and thank you for contributing to tonight's conversation. And Devin, I turn it over to you.
Devin, one sec, you're muted.
Thank you.
So before we get started, I'd love to take a second to reflect on what the author has expressed about the title of this book with the New York Times. So here he wrote that the title "I Can Date Jesus" relates to a conversation I had with my mom. I think, and I say this respectfully, religion can take brilliant people and suspend their better senses because faith is so important to them. They don't want to question anything too much because it could shake everything. But this idea that I'm not supposed to, I'm born gay, but I shouldn't act on it because it's some perceived affront to God. So essentially, I shouldn't lead a whole life based on the idea that if I die, I might get to go to heaven. So some people, they wait to die to live. I'm not that person. I don't think God made any mistakes. So one of the first themes that the book talks about is exposing and challenging hypocrisy. This takes place on page 3 of the book. And the quote reads, "How can you be obedient to dogma you found oppressive? How can you cling to tradition and exalt a vision of God that minimizes you and expects you to suppress what is innate to you?" So my first question is kind of for Thera. Also, John, you can remove the presentation from the screen. My first question is to Thera, in terms of like your experience with religion. As a queer man, did you ever feel like religion embraced you or pushed you away?
I grew up in the church. As a matter of fact, I grew up so in the church that it was directly behind my home. I could never get away from it. It was something that we just always did. It was a part of my everyday life. This book really spoke to a lot of themes that have gone through my life. And I'm really excited to have you both here with me so we can discuss. Maybe we've all gone through those type of situations. But just looking at my past, I grew up going to Ebenezer Mission Baptist Church, where I had the oldest Baptist minister in the nation. It was Reverend F.W. Wells. I think he passed away when he was 93 and was still in the pulpit. It was very important for my family to go to church, but I got lucky because I had a great mother who was an educator and a father who was a contractor. And my mother and father wanted us to go to church, not necessarily for the lesson, but for the community. I grew up in the middle of nowhere, country town, and there was a Black population. And they were like, "We're going to church. You Black boys are going to go to these churches and cohort with people just like you, good people, people that are held accountable," because I think the church does that, some of that, also holding individuals accountable. But it was a great experience. But yeah, I grew up in the church. I can't say that I'm as religious as I was, but I do have a connection with the Lord in my own way. But I think that's through my upbringing.
I agree. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Pastor John.
I didn't want to speak over you, but I resonate so much with what Thera said, and as a cis straight person, I'm grateful to be here and be a part of the conversation, and don't want to flex or take up too much space, because this religion world is the one in which I dwell and do a lot of thinking, but I never felt excluded from the church or marginalized from the church on behalf of my my orientation, my gender identity, right? But the bad news is the church is really good at discriminating against lots of people and marginalizing and isolating lots of people, if we're not careful. And I think this is why we see church trends going the way that they are in some places, in some spaces. This idea that something can be the cultural bedrock, the thing that's supposed to hold us all together, the common narrative that we share, and yet it says to some, you can't be a part of this. You can't be a part of this without diminishing who God made you to be, and it's patently unfair, to say the least.
I agree, and much like Thera, I grew up in the church. Like, I have very fond memories of like my aunt blowing her horn when she was outside picking up me and my cousins. And it wasn't until I moved to Denver that I even realized that affirming churches were a thing where you could go and be openly queer, and just, authentically, like walking into a church holding hands with someone is like with your same-sex partner was mind-blowing. I was like, what? Like, how? And he even touches on like Catholic guilt, which like I didn't grow up Catholic, but I did have a lot of guilt around just like calling myself a Christian and like also like embracing my queerness and like not being afraid or not having the desire to turn away from that.
Yeah, I think guilt goes throughout all religious ideas. It's just something that happens. I think that's what it is. I think that's the check and balances of religion, like thou shalt not sin. So you're like, oh, I feel guilty because I sinned. But growing up, for my guilt was basically like not holding myself up to the standards of my counterparts, my bigger, badder brother, my tougher, more athletic cousins, and things of that nature. Really what made me feel a little bit more insecure, as opposed to the religious aspect where I sang in the church. I was really good. Everybody wanted to hear me. Praise Jesus. I got my way out. But we do those things. We try to figure out how can we skirt through being the queer boy, because I was obviously gay to myself as I look back at it. But what can I do to get these people off my back in some ways?
Yeah.
The community that I pastor here in Denver is called Belong, and that's really, really on purpose, because I honestly believe that the deepest longing that all of us have is to belong, to have a sense that there's a place where we can go and people will embrace us and welcome us. And sometimes we are in a situation where we're told we have to earn that, right? But in church, if you can be present, if you can serve, if you can sing, if you can preach, you get to belong there, right? Like but also you have to pass, right? Like you have to you have to at least arguably somehow, and at least in the setting where I grew up, and realizing this was part of what drove me away from the church as a teen, is realizing like there's this incredible message of invitation and love and grace and inclusion.
Wow.
Except that there's a force field, and like this invisible force field that you put up, and for some people who might want to run toward this invitation, they get rejected, and what that does to a person is difficult.
Yeah.
And all it takes is that one person too, in the whole lot of people, just takes that one to single you out, to make you feel a certain way in your queerness. That is an obvious set to like, just leave, let's get out of here. This is not for us, as it speaks to, the dogma, you have to be this way, but you feel this way. That means you can't be this way. It's that juggling of those emotions.
I remember reading some time ago, just an article that talked about how, like, even in the church, how, like, specifically in Black churches, you may have like a gay or queer, like, choir director, or like, but no one talks about it. No one embraces it. No one asks questions. As long as they have the choir singing like the best songs and like they're lit and backing up the pastor, there's no questions about it. But the moment you try to have that conversation, it's like, oh, we don't talk about that, or that's not right, or then it becomes an issue.
Well, that maybe leads me to a question for either or both of you, which is, if there's some line, if there's some, like, you can operate here, but you can't go, you can't be out in this way, or you can't cross this boundary, whatever that was, at some point, did you have a sense of either I live as my authentic self, or I lose this familial connection that church has represented, where you had to, in some ways, choose between those things?
I think there are those individuals that would do that. That for my personality is a little too drastic. I try to keep, I'll keep the craziest cousin that's the wrong person to hang out with me as close as possible, just because I love him so much, but still not being the best for me in the end of it all. So I was always drawn to church. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed playing with my friends. I enjoyed, doing all the things that you do when you are in church. But as I grew older and sexuality became a part of my reality, I think that's when it really changed. And I was really fortunate just to have a mother and father that wanted us to go to church, not necessarily to learn the book, but also just to have that camaraderie with my community. So after school, after high school, going to college, my mom would always say, well, you coming home to go to church? She still wanted me to go to church, and I'd be like, no, and she wouldn't pester me. She never told me, you need to be saved. I just never had that portion of it. Now, outside my family, the four walls, that's when I really got it. That's where I would go to a basketball game. Oh, the Black boys there dunking the ball. I'm on the band playing my horn, looking as nerdy as possible. It was just one of those things where, he speaks in the book where he would go into these situations, but he would look around and know that everyone's looking at him, that he felt like his eyes are on him, that he was just not cut from the same cloth. although he wanted to be a part of it, there was nothing that he could not do that they were doing. It's just that he knew that in some of these churches, you're gay, that ain't right, you're a sissy, you're a punk, you know, all these things that really push a lot of queer individuals away. But I got really lucky.
Yeah. I honestly, I had such, I love that experience for you there, because like I left, like I grew up Baptist, and I left that church because like I never felt like I quite fit in. And it was never because of my queerness. I just think that I didn't match like the status quo of like Black youth at my church. And I felt kind of outcasted already. And so when I turned 18, I changed churches and started going to a place called the Simple Church, but that was like a predominantly white church. Loved the message, but like I admit, I was like, wow, I wish I did see more people who looked like me. So like, even in those moments, like I still like, it's like I just retreated further and further into myself while still trying to get the word. And like, much like there, when I moved to Colorado, like I have like, you know, would call my grandmother to check in, and I could hear her, you know, have you found a church home, baby? And I'm like, trying to explain to my family what an affirming church is, and they don't really want to hear that. So it's just like, yeah, it was just complex a little bit. So John, you can take us back to the presentation. Another quote that he kind of like discusses under the theme of exposing and challenging hypocrisy is, I love that Beyonce remained country as hell, and country in a way that is very specific to a Black girl born in Houston, but with Louisiana roots. I love that when R&B began to decline on radio, she never picked up a glow stick and joined the EDM wave, like so many others trying to stay relevant. Obviously, she made this choice long after she had cemented her place in music and culture, but there's still something admirable about a Black woman foregoing trends that pander to white people at the expense of the Black creativity. I know all too well what it's like to be urged to tone down who you are, sold under the pretense that it broadens your appeal to the mainstream. So my question, I kind of have two questions. John, you can bring us back to the screen. So my first question is kind of for both of you, but mainly Pastor John. But you know, like, how do we as Black people, like that quote about kind of like being something that you're exactly not? I thought that it really kind of spoke to like how we as people of color just generally show up in the workplace or predominantly white spaces. So just like on a Black level, and then we can talk about a queer level, but like, what's been your experience with that?
Yeah, I'm so glad you went there, because as I was reading that quote, those were the experiences that were coming to mind, right? The way that I often speak about it is, despite the fact that I've grown up around white people, there are white people in my family. There are plenty of white people in my everyday experience. Despite that fact, if I walk into a room that is full of white people versus a room that is full of people of color, or versus the feeling you get when you walk into a Black church, a room, a worshipful space full of Black people, I breathe differently in those different spaces. And there is more room to be authentically me in those spaces where I don't have to think about being the only or one of only a few Black people in the space in the room. Du Bois talks about this double consciousness, right? Like this idea that at all times I have to be understanding my own experience, who I am as a person, who I am in this space, but also trying to encode and decode how other people are perceiving me and expect what they're expecting of me. And that's for my safety. That's not for fun, right? Like that is self-preservation, active at all times. And that same thing is true. People have a sense when they walk into a room, whether it's a room that has space for them, literally, if physically there's space for them, but also if the people in that space look enough or resemble or they vibe, right? Like if they vibe on the same level, on the same frequency as them. And the reason that I'm so passionate about creating religious spaces where, as much as possible, everybody gets to come in and breathe easy, is because I don't think you get to feel truly welcome, truly at home, truly acknowledged in your own skin if you don't have the experience of at least knowing, like, hey, you in particular are welcome here. Not everybody's welcome, right? Like, but you are welcome in this space.
Yeah, I think that he got it on the head right there. I think about us. We as Black people, we are the kings, queens, the masters of switching. We have to sometimes, and it's self-preservation when we do these things. I just for an example, going into a room full of, let's say, professional white colleagues, my attitude is one of two. It's let's go in there and show them what we're made of, right? Or I hope they don't give me no problems today. And that is a weird, like, juxtapose of ideas. Like, let's do this, or am I gonna have to fight one of these people? Are we gonna get into an argument? I hope they drank their coffee this morning, hoping that things just don't go left just due to myself feeling a certain way, And sometimes I put it on myself. I can walk into a room full of white people and they don't really care, but I can still have that worldly pressure that has been put on me into those spaces also.
Right. I think one of the things that like comes to mind in terms of like blackness and queerness, when you just show up in any space, it's like there's kind of not even like a stereotype, but some people expect like a certain energy from a queer Black man. Like, because we're Black and queer, if you present the slightest amount of feminine, people may expect you to be that, the personality type where you may be loud, or you may be like super witty and like quippy and like all these things. And like you walk into a space and sometimes people may expect that, and you're just kind of like, oh, this is uncomfortable. Or, some people expect you to be what they perceive what like a Black stereotype to be is. And then, like Thera said, I'm about to come in here swinging.
Right.
And I do want to take a moment to acknowledge, so we're getting some comments. I see that we have a comment from Emily Zeke, and they wrote that it's so frustrating when people say everyone is welcome. Like, no, if predators are welcome here, then their prey is not. Which I agree. I feel like there's like, I think there is a good line of like accountability. Like, if you are an all welcoming organization, and someone who may be queer, who may suffer from like certain mental illnesses, like, and like the church like automatically cast those people out. Like, I think that it's really important to like, just if you're welcoming, then like don't be afraid to have that like accountable / welcoming piece. Like I even hate to admit, but like even like around mental health in my family, religion plays like a huge aspect. But like I have family members who have schizophrenia, and like family has turned away and like, oh, like called it like the devil, or all these things that it's not, and just really pushing away from like a more serious conversation that needs to be had. And like, I'll be honest, like kind of going off of what Sam Moore commented, like I think that makes religion very confusing, because I think it may pose the question of, what do you want from me, if I'm being completely honest?
Go for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
It takes, I spend a fair amount of energy trying to advocate for churches to be welcoming. Let's put defining that aside for a second. I spend a fair amount of energy trying to encourage churches to be welcoming, but also let's acknowledge that welcoming is the floor, right? Like that is the base expectation, right? And so sometimes in moments of like, people celebrating, you're a welcoming church, it's like, yeah, but we're still just beginning, because to be a church that wants to be welcoming means that you have to understand the context of the harm that's been done. So that means not just saying, hey, the doors are open and everyone is welcome to come in. It means I'm going to acknowledge that it might take something different for a queer person who's been excluded from these spaces before. It might take something different, some extra effort for them to come in here, and we want to be accommodating. The same thing often goes for people with very real disabilities, right? Like, do we have, is this building accessible? Can people actually enter it, right? And and acknowledging if there's harm that's been done, then there are things you have to go out of your way to do in order to be accommodating. And if harm has been done, you might have to have extra things in place to be aware for harm being done again, for it being perpetuated, for people coming in and redoing some of that harm. And so it's not enough to simply say, look, oh, we're welcoming, or we're going to try real hard not to give you a side eye and look at you holding hands with your partner, right? Like that's the floor, and we have to also talk about building on top of that.
Yeah, you have to definitely put in the work in these moments. You can be welcoming, but if you're not internalizing some of the things that make these things go across, in the religious realm towards people, you have to put in the work to do that. And I'm really happy, Pastor Peter, that I'm finding this out. It sounds like a church that I would love to go and check it out and see and enjoy this energy, because as we know, like affirming churches, they aren't really out there in a lot of ways, especially when it comes to small town Hobbs, New Mexico, where there's a limited number of churches and there are very few outward gay people, queer people, trans people. So thank you for that. Thanks for doing that and having that in your heart.
Appreciate it.
I agree. And Emily Zeke also just commented saying PTSD can be very difficult to navigate, both in suffering from it and in supporting others who are struggling. Hypervigilance and anxiety can be so tough, and it really can. And I think especially just, even outside of the church, just like, I think just functioning as a person, and like, it can just be a lot. Like the person who may be carrying that burden, and even the person who is creating and trying to hold space in those regards. I think one of the, I forgot like my last thought for a moment, but I 100% agree with Sarah. I'll be honest, Pastor Peters, I'm really intrigued by your
Come and hang out with us.
Will do.
Right. John, you can take us back to the PowerPoint. So one of the things that stood out to me in the book was I called this theme First Heartbreak. And it's in the chapter where he talks about where he's like, kind of going after a guy who's not really giving him the time of the day. And the quote reads, "All the same, I may have failed in losing my virginity in the way I envisioned. I may not have gotten Jordan to want me as I wanted him, but I did learn from experience. I couldn't make someone love me. I couldn't make myself desirable to someone who didn't want me. I couldn't compel someone to see me in the way in which I wanted to be seen. All I could do was be myself. And if someone didn't fool with it, find someone else. I didn't quite master that with dudes that came after Jordan, but with him, I reached a place where I could let him go." John, you can take us off. I think that one of the things that like stood out to me, which like you'll hear queer people talk about this often, is that like when most people, especially I would say like millennials and older, like because we had to spend so much like of our youth in the closet, we didn't really get to like date or even just have the option of like openly crushing or flirting with someone. So like when we don't really experience heartbreak until our 20s, or we don't really get our like first taste of being unapologetically ourselves until our 20s. So like when heartbreak happens, you have to go through like, this is what it's like to feel undesired. This is what it's like to not be someone's type. Or this is what it's like to tell someone that you're not interested in. Like, young, like cis straight people are able to kind of go through like, I won't say K through 12, maybe like middle school through high school. You get to have those years of dating and crushing and like all those things. And by the time you're in your 20s, it's like, okay, I've lived that. Like I actually know what I like. I know what a serious relationship is. And I don't know why, but that quote just rang home for me about how like, that's just kind of like another way that we don't get that experience because some of us may have grown up in spaces where our sexuality is discouraged.
Oh yeah, and especially as a little kid, you think about when you have this cute little boy and this cute little girl and their families meet and the parents say, oh, they're gonna get married when they grow up. And me, I would tell people that I knew I was gay from a very young age. When we were 5 years old, I didn't care about Samantha. I was looking cute at Timmy, you know, just as a little boy. So I knew I was gay at a real young age. So when people were like, oh, he's so cute, look at his little spider legs, oh my gosh, you're going to be a lady killer. And I'm like, lady? What does that mean? Like, I want to talk to Timmy. He's cute. You know, so those, even though as young as that is where we sexualize so many things, but we're not open to the full realms of sexuality, you know. And I in my work, I discuss sex. It's one of the main points of my business, and a lot of it starts with nothing but stigma. Sex, from the time we know about it, it's stigmatized. We cannot have it. You should not do it. You're going to get pregnant. You're going to go to hell. You're going to get a disease. You're going to die. All these things that are just traumatizing, right? When all you really want is not necessarily even sex. Maybe you just want to have a partner. Maybe you just want to hold someone's hand. Maybe you want to be able to cry on someone's shoulder. Those are sexual ideas too, you know? So as in that quote there, it just really spoke to a lot of my relationships, which, you know, were undercover. You know, I always wish that I could have a boyfriend in my teenage years and tell my mom, you know, little Timmy's coming over and we're going to play video games. And she'd be like, well, don't eat all the cookies. I wish those things would happen, you know, but as I got older, you know, in my 20s is when my mother and father found out that I was gay. And you know, lo and behold, I'm a good person still. Who knew? Who knew? You know, through all of that. But definitely the younger you are, the more pressure is put on you in those sexual situations, and heartbreak happens. I think a lot more for a queer community. Because if you don't know someone that is outwardly queer in any space, you don't even have a chance to be like, he's cute. You know, you say he's cute, but he would beat me up. I would never tell him. I'm afraid of that. Like, he has a girl, you know, even those mindless crushes really could be detrimental and traumatizing for a lot of queer youth out there.
Yeah.
Devin, what?
Oh no, go ahead.
What you shared what you shared up front reminded me of just the power of possibility models, right? Like, if I can't see it, I can't be it. And how much do queer kids miss out on because they don't get to see examples of the love that they might aspire to, right? Like, in just simply honored or recognized or shown in spaces, or you don't get to see the older couple at church who you get to want to be like.
Yes.
Yeah, that's our mission now. That's my mission. My mission is to be a queer role model, legend. I really want people to see me and say, I want to be that queer guy. You know, some little 12-year-old scraggly little black boy named Farrah somewhere in this world can see me and say, I want to be just like that queer guy. And I think we're doing a great job now of pressing the envelope on these situations. You know, we're right here, and this is broadcast. Anyone in this world can watch this right now. About 20 years ago, this was not happening. We were at a club, we were underground, you know, that's how it was. So things are definitely progressing. And I challenge all queer people to be that role model. You know, I love my parents. My parents have been married almost 50 years. I've been with my partner for 13. He ain't going nowhere because I want to be a great role model of how a relationship up, down, ins and outs can work. You know, because a lot of queer people are like, I don't want to get married. I don't need no man. I don't need a man, but I want one. I don't need a Lamborghini, but I want one. I don't need that double cheeseburger, but I want one. You know, so it's just where we have to be those role models that we did not have. You know, we don't need, you know, famous gay role models. Those are great, but I think even on the local level, this is the people that you'll see day in and day out. You don't have to wait 6 months for their next movie. You will see them day in, day out. So I challenge all queer people to be those role models for those little ones that are coming up after us. So we won't let that heartache.
Exactly. And I think I want to, John, can you take us back to the presentation really quickly? So this next part, we called Sex Matters. People don't really have frank conversations about sexuality and the awkward stuff. There's no real sex ed outside of just don't have babies. So the chastity belt is tightened even more around queer people. I kind of wanted to open that up. Sex is natural. Sex is good. And I lost my spot. Sex is good, and we should be able to talk about that. One review, someone tagged me and said, I love this book, but I took a few points off because it is very graphic about sex. And I don't think some people will be comfortable with that. I'm glad I put it in the book for people like that who think, oh my goodness, it's a queer person talking about being a human being. It's silly, and so hopefully I'm helping break that. And I think one that touches on what Dara talked about, but even in Alina's comment, They say, wow, yes, Devin, a big part of my queerness has been a sense of loss and grief from being repressed and not coming out to late 20s, 30s, and all the queer relationships that never happened. And I think it plays a part in that. I feel like I will be like I tell people this all the time, and I get funny looks, but like, I mean, my like high school sex ed was literally just like a process of like what happens when you do it and like what you are at risk of, which is essentially like use a condom to have babies. But like as gay men, I'm gonna be rip the bandit off and be really honest. Like no one tells you how to prepare. No one tells you how you may feel afterwards. Like no one has these conversations with you. Like I literally learned from like a gay YouTuber named Davey Wavy who had all these videos about like how to do XYZ. Like that's literally it. And then like on top of like harboring this information, like you can look at comments of what Nofi says, and it says, I think it's for queer individuals to experience rejection because some experience it on a constant basis. Like you couple this lack of knowledge with like still wanting to put yourself out there, but also you suffer from like, if you're a person of color, you may experience someone who may say they're not into your race. If you are overweight or you may be a little thick, you may have someone who say they're not into your body type. Your hair may be too short. You may not be white. You may be fetishized. So someone's like, oh my God, like I love Black people. I love Hispanic or Asian people. And then it's like, okay, now it's just getting awkward, you know? And so I love that he like wanted to have these conversations in this book too, because like, it's just hard. And just to feel acknowledged, it's like the only safe space that's been able to be had is through queer literature and like writers sharing their experiences, but also like Thera says, and like also just being out here like in this forum that people will be able to look back on in 20 years, you know?
Yeah, his portion about his whole I guess sexual game with Jordan is just very an example of what I think a lot of queer people go with. They find this person is a tumultuous person in their own right, you know, and can't commit to them in a certain way, and you deal with their bull, and then it breaks off, and then you see them again, and for some reason you start that bull right up again as if they changed or you changed and you're still the same person, so why would they have changed? And then it's just a really bad cycle where we don't have the opportunity just to go out there and reach and seek. We're stuck with Jordan. I see him every time. I had a crush on him in '86 and he's still alive and kicking, and he's still got those curls that I like. Let's keep going, you know, let's try it again. So it also puts you in that circular motion of just doing the same old thing because that's all you think you have the options for as queer people. Like get it and get it done. That's it.
Yeah.
Like pick him and let's go. We're done. Wrap it up.
And I think having rejection as a baseline, having rejection as a thing that is constant or nearly constant is really dangerous, because I think that's one of the things that makes us really vulnerable for abuse, right? Like if we're told that we're unacceptable, if we're not shown that we're lovable, that we're welcomed, that whatever, if we're going to talk about sexually, right, that hey, you can be good and beloved of God, and God made most of us to be sexual beings, right? Like so have a framework where that's allowed and you can be good and also be a sexual being. Because if not, if it's based in shame and rejection, then among many the other harmful things that we've talked about, I think it sets you up for other relationships that devalue you, right? Mm-hmm. If you're told this on a basic level, you're going to allow that to be replicated over and over and over again, rather than looking for people and experiences and relationships that build you up and honor you as good and lovable and worthy.
Those are great words, you know, coming from you, Pastor, because I think as queer people, we don't see enlightened souls like yourself. You know, kids don't see that. They see you're gay, you're going to hell, or you can't act up on that. You need to stick. You can be gay, but you can't be gay. You know what I mean by that? My mom asked me that when I came out. She said, "Are you living gay?" And I said, "I'm not dead gay." You know, she yeah, you know, she did. And then I think it's funny too now. Me and my mom, we laugh about it, but she was just like, "Oh, you're gay? Okay. Are you living gay? What does that mean, Mom? I just told you I was gay." But it was, she had that distinct, well, you can be gay, but you better not be over here kissing on boys.
Right.
You better, she like the sexual part just really mattered to her so much more than me. I'm like, I just want a boyfriend to go to the clubs with and dance with. And, you know, if it comes to that, that's none of your business, mom. You know, but she was in this realm of, are you gay? And are you living gay? So it's a very interesting world we live in.
It is. And I feel like one of the, like, when I came out, like I came out to my siblings and like we had a lot of like difficult conversations, and I admire how far they've come and how much they've allowed me to educate them on just queerness in general. Because like when I first came out, one of my siblings was like, well, you don't want to be a girl, right? And I was like, no. I was like, sexuality and gender identity are two completely different things. And we have all like a plethora of conversations, like talking about like, you know, it's not as black and white as you want it to be. Like I was telling my sister, I was like, you may see me with painted nails one day. You may see me wearing a wig with my best friends. You could see a lot, but like, like how I identify, like I'm not defined by like gender norms, and no one is, you know, like you can choose to be, you know. So I love that little tidbit that you just added. Also, just to point out some of the comments, Edward Nofi just said, yes, like there's limited literature in an academic sense about the mechanics of queer sexuality because heteronormative structures has dominated access to mainstream sexual education, which is really true, especially for like the trans community. Like I was having this conversation with a friend, how there's no just like actual literature about like the anatomy of a trans person. And it's very difficult to have access to that information because no one's writing about it. And it's just now being discussed, you know, and some of like, if you said none of this is in the mainstream media, so it's a little bit more arduous to find. Rebecca Montoya said, yes, absolutely. All my childhood friends and family were fawning over boys when I was over here thinking to myself, what about so-and-so girl? She cute. That was not okay. And I held my tongue and realized I wasn't what was considered acceptable. And I agree. I've known I was gay for as long as I can remember. I never knew what it was. But for as long as I can remember, I know that I've had an attraction to men. And Emily Zeke is just laughing at what you said. And then we have a comment from AJ McGee that says, the expectation to be a palatable gay was such a hard part of coming out, which is very true. It's hard.
Yeah, I think just being Black and being palatable, you know, and then to add queerness on top of that, ooh, you know, and then queer maybe with a disability on top of that, woo, there's just so many things that can compound that can like really stifle someone's greatness in a lot of ways. And I think a lot of people are stifled due to those systems that are put in.
I agree. I think this is the last part. John, we can go back to the presentation. One of the last parts of Sex Matters is, as much shame as I felt each and every time I engaged in virtual host shit, overall, I can't say that I regret any of it. In a lot of ways, it's helped me. It gave me validation as a sexually desirable being. And I love that quote because it's like, I feel like, you know, we grow up, or at least like when we were growing up, like our recognition of like what like is sexually attractive to queer men was like abs. You go to the gym, like you're like beach blonde hair, you have white skin, or you're lighter skin, and all these things, and you don't see dark skinned queer Black people, you know. And I think when you finally have a chance to flirt with someone, or maybe even have sex with someone or date someone, and it's like, I love you because you're thick, or I love you because, you know, you are you know, it hits different. And I definitely don't have regrets over like what he said, virtual host shit.
Yeah. I think a lot of it is, you know, that shame can be just thusly thereafter. You know, I think we've all had those experiences, or we may all have had those experiences where we got into a situation and the next day we woke up and we were like, who are you? And that was not what you wanted, you know? And you learn a lesson from that, you know. Right. You know, next time, don't drink that third martini. You know, it makes you do something you don't like. You know, you get a skill set after a while. But I think sometimes you got to be a little shameful to yourself and that's what makes us better, right? You know, when you don't do as well on the test, you say, hey, Thera, next time we got to get this algebra. Let's get this. Let's get it. Let's do it right this time. So I think shame is a part of it, and I think it makes us good. I think it's the external shame that I really, really don't like. Is when someone tells you it's bad.
Yeah. And I feel like one of like my biggest lessons I've learned recently is like extending yourself grace. Like learning that like it's okay. Like you said, sometimes you may not need that third martini, but sometimes you have it. And that's okay. You know, and like, because I feel I've definitely spent so much of my life being hard on myself. And I didn't even realize until someone called me out about it. They were like, you're aggressively hard on yourself. And the way that you support yourself is not how you support those around you. You lift everyone up, but like you don't extend yourself that grace. So I do hope that queer people, you know, with all that we go through, the expectations that we juggle, or just as Black people in general, with everything that we have to deal with, I do hope that like a lot of people are learning today, in today's time, to extend themselves grace.
Grace is one of my favorite words.
Yeah, I was going to say, speak on it, Pastor. Speak on some grace.
Well, honestly, grace is one thread, but what y'all have shared so much brings to my mind is that community gives us a safe place to try and fail, right? To try something out, to make the wrong decision, but to still be welcomed and beloved, to still be held in spite of that. And that way, the shame that comes up, or at least the internal sense of, hey, I missed my own mark, right? Like I was aiming at something and I missed it. That feeling doesn't then have to be overwhelming, right? It doesn't have to be devastating. It can, if you have a community that says, hey, we got you. No matter, you messed up, that's fine. We still got you. That you know that there's enough grace for you to mess up in this way, or to miss the mark in this way, and to still be told that you're beloved and that you have a home.
Yeah.
I wish I could hug you, Pastor Peter.
Yeah, high five, a hug, like that's it. I love the word grace too.
An elbow or something.
So good.
When I see you when it's safe, then for sure.
Right.
That was so good. Oh my goodness.
So, John, I'm going to go back to the presentation. These next few slides are about intersectionality. So in this one, this is an interview with the New York Times. Arceneaux says, it's hard to be Black, it's hard to be queer, and very difficult to be other, particularly in this country. I think these stories are necessary. I never meant it in a disparaging way to any other person, but I think in terms of otherness and how we consume it in terms of mass media, often it is solely through the lens of pathology, as in this idea of it's so awful to be you. It's pathology porn. It triggers white guilt. And I'm going to switch to the next quote on intersectionality and then the Black queer experience matters. He says on page 69, I forgot to take out the New York Times part, forgive me. I let years go by before telling my mom. What prompted my doing so was the publication of an essay that I had written about two young boys who had reportedly committed suicide within the same month after being bullied for being gay. This was before the It Gets Better movement. These were two young Black boys, and the world wasn't often as responsive to their needs as it was to those of white kids. And I want to point out that, oh no, we lost Pastor. I'm sure he'll be back.
We'll get him back.
Okay. But like what I wanted to point out, I don't know if you are a fan. Also, just to clarify for those watching, the It Gets Better movement was essentially like a call to action by openly queer people, kind of motivating younger queer people, letting them know that, like, you know, you may be going through a hard time right now and it may be difficult, you may be closeted, but it does get better. Like on the other end, you do get to become your own person. And that was in response, I can't remember to whose death it was, but there was a queer youth who had committed suicide due to bullying, I believe, that led to that. But like, there is this interview where Keke Palmer, Queen, is on the Wendy Williams show, and she's talking about like Wendy's kind of like shaming Kiki. And what Kiki kind of talks about is no one really ever listens to a Black woman, or no one ever really listens to Black people. And she was saying that in terms of the Me Too movement, saying that a lot of people of color had been very vocal about their experiences in terms of Me Too, but it just doesn't feel to be intersectional. And there are a lot of things that don't feel intersectional with queer people. I think that we lost several queer POC around the time that the It Gets Better movement started. And I'm thankful that it started, but I admit that it was difficult to carry those burdens of the death of queer youth, and I would just say it's just heartbreaking, for lack of better phrasing.
Yeah, but I think we are in the right direction. That's the good thing about it. As I think about during that time, there was a lot of uncertainties, especially as a young queer Black man just coming of age and out of college, making some money, trying to figure out things, and still not feeling the connection to the world that I thought that I deserved. I did what y'all said, right? I did everything you said. I went to school. I was smart. I didn't go to jail. Actually, I did go to jail, but that's another story. But it's situations like that where you just don't feel still connected to this earth in general and to the spirits that are you surrounded by in your community. So that quote out of the book really, I was like, you're so right.
I'm reminded of something that Akilah Hughes said.
Love her.
She's a journalist who works for Crooked Media. Before George Floyd, before last summer, she talked about the way that we are overly comfortable with Black pain and Black death. And she pointed out that if there was a video that came around of someone abusing an animal to death, we wouldn't share that. We wouldn't, you know what I mean? That wouldn't go, it would be disturbing to us. We wouldn't share it. And yet images of Black suffering and Black death go viral, in part for awareness, I understand, right? But there's a part of it that underscores this general idea that Black discomfort and Black pain, and even unto the point of Black death, is so palatable, is just so completely acceptable for the society at large, that we don't think to challenge it, right? That we don't think to stand up against it. And so when you're talking about these young people losing their lives to suicide, I can relate to the idea, or to the feeling that if they had been white, the response that might have been different, and the need to say, well, if no one's going to say something, then dang it, I'll stand up and say something, because the world needs to not be okay with this, and I think that's related to. I'll say it like this, and I'll get off my soapbox, I promise. The same callousness that lets you look at Black death as a spectacle is the same callousness that lets you see queer teens, queer people of color who are youth, who end up homeless, who end up without safety, without community. It lets you look at that and then keep your gaze going and keep your attention going, and the ability to not have your heartstrings tugged by one of those things is directly related to the same callousness in the other one. And so but I think you're right. I think that we're coming alive. I think that we are more aware, we're more sensitive, we're more responsive than we have been in the past, but it's an ongoing process.
Right. Yeah. Right. And it's it's trauma porn, honestly. It's seen in films. Even to this day, there are still films that are just kind of reimagining what slavery was like, and retelling these stories of plantation life, and although I think it's important, I was talking with someone, we didn't exactly see eye to eye, but I was talking to someone about racism in general, and their idea of what racism was slavery. When they were that's racism, and I was no, I was it's systemic. I was it is rooted in every bit of this country. I was like, and so like you said, like, we see so much Black death, we see so much Black pain that we're numb to it. My heart breaks every time I have to see a Black brother get killed. But, to other people, it's just another Black person who's been killed. And if they don't, right.
Just another Thursday. Yeah, but on the other side of that, it's such a horrible situation. But I always think about this. Of course, there is that trauma porn. They love to see it. But on the flip side, Black joy is just as frightening to these people.
Yes.
Black joy can shut a crowd down. Now, they're too loud. They're having a great time.
Right.
Black joy is just as scary as anything else that we can do. So it's a really interesting world that we live in due to the fact that we persevere. We built this mug. We continue to uplift it. I say, and I hope this is not offensive to anyone out there, but I call America my abusive father. I love him so much, but every once in a while he hits mom, and that's not right. Every once in a while he shakes my little brother, and that's not right. But I love my father. It is such an abusive situation full of love and hope, but continually the abuse is there. You see it in so many different ways. So I call America my abusive father, which I don't. My father's not abusive. He's a great man, but I just, that kind of sentiment, I think my dad might be watching just so he won't say anything to me later.
I also, just to acknowledge some of Emily Zeke's comments. The first comment says, that message is so diametrically opposite of my experience in Catholic Church, where excommunication is a very real thing that's held over people who don't conform. And then they commented and said, this is very true about women in horror movies and murder shows. It's always showing women being violently slain. And it's like, this is scary. Why is this a fetish? It's exactly like, why do we keep reiterating? I don't know if anyone has watched Malcolm and Marie, but like, one of the things that, it's a great film on Netflix. One of the things that one of the characters talks about, it's like a film within a film kind of thing. Like they're talking about a film. One of the characters is like, why did this woman have to essentially like fight for her life in this moment shirtless? Like why, like, it degrades women, and it's not, it's like over dramatizing these things.
Wow.
Yeah, you have to watch Malcolm and Marie. It's a fantastic film if you love like just really good film. Going back to the presentation, John, one of the last quotes about intersectionality is, there are plenty of straight Black men who have said to me that the barbershop is partially where they learn how to be a Black man in this world. I understand that, but as a Black man in this world who happens to be gay, my past experiences will never allow me to share this sentiment. I can never allow myself to share their sentiments. I can never allow myself to feel completely comfortable in those spaces because, one, I've had way too many experiences with bad barbers, and two, I've never found those spaces to be welcoming to the sort of man that I am. While I do hope that the younger queer Black men who now go into shops that will never have to witness the sort of condemnations I did in years past, my expectations are extremely limited. And I love the general like camaraderie around like black men in barbershops. One of my most like vivid memories is like I was like talking to my best friend AJ, and he had like a change of clothes to go to the barbershop, and AJ is a Black man, and like I just remember thinking like, we really have to do this before we go into a barbershop. We really have to maybe wear something a little less feminine, maybe add a little bit more bass in our voice, maybe, just because like from the time that we're young, your barbers talk to you about anything and everything. So they're asking, when you're young, you got a girlfriend, what the girls like at your school. And when you become older, it's like, oh, you got hoes. And it's like all of these things. And like, it's not often. Like I confess, like even to this day, I haven't even told my barber here in Denver, who's been cutting my hair for 2 years now, that I'm queer, and I don't think that she would be like, oh, I can't cut your hair anymore. But it's just because there's still that like lingering fear of like, will this person like not want to like work with me? Also, we are approaching our hour mark. It is okay if we go over, but I am letting y'all know that we are at our 60-minute mark.
Okay. Well, can I just piggyback off of what you were talking about?
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
the barbershop is a really weird place for me to go. I just never went to it. I had dreadlocks for the longest time. Now I'm just in this short, messy natural. I like to call it my Frederick Douglass, James Brown. I still feel cute. But I did have my very first real barber's experience in New Orleans a couple of years ago on a work trip where there was a black barber right down the street. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna go get my mustache and my beard trim. I'd never done it. I wanted, I wanted the towel. I wanted the straight range. I wanted all those things. And why not? They looked like they had a bunch of people there. And I walked in, and I feel I am gay when I walk into a room. People just say, "Hey, that's a big gay black man." That's how I feel. But in this situation, there were about 8 dudes in there. There was nobody getting a haircut at this point in time. So it was just like the homies, At this point in time, all the homies, kids running in and out, eating potato chips. And I walked in there, and I stepped back 10, 15 years, where I was like, I'm here to get a service. I got the money, and I felt uncomfortable. I felt like they know I'm gay. What are they going to say? Is somebody going to pop off on me? Are they going to ask a sexual question about hoes? I don't know any hoes, So it was when he mentioned that in the book, I was like, oh my gosh, I'd never experienced that until I was like 40.
Yeah.
That says something like throughout life you can not experience something. Then here I am as a black man walking into a situation full of black people and being like, oh my God, I am this 12-year-old gay guy again that is nervous, watching my mouth. I think I code switched, I think I said a few N-words, which I don't do. It was one of those situations where I literally felt this pressure to be accepted, but not in my own skin. And it was a very weird situation.
Yes.
As you were invoking the sacred space of the barbershop, I was a couple things came to mind. One was the new movie Soul, which is worthy of debate for a number of reasons, but I loved the dynamic of the barbershop in this movie, right? And there were ways in which it reflected my experience. I've had lovely experiences, I've had great conversations, but I had a flashback to like being 19 years old and sitting down in a barbershop, and the barber like walks a few feet away, grabs something, turns around, and like tosses it in my lap as he's like sitting me down to put the cape on and everything. And I look down, and it's a porno mag that he has handed me. It was like 10:30 in the morning. I didn't ask for this, but it was, for him, it was just here's the way that we're going to engage in this space. And it's like, man, there's these beautiful things, but they're also sometimes wrapped up and sometimes too closely attached to like misogyny, and they're the things that make us feel like we have to code switch or have to play into some role. Again, it's one of these places where the sense of belonging can be so real, but also which means that the sense of rejection can be really real also.
Yeah.
I think that's how, like, I'm a master of deflection. So you ask me a question, I can very easily turn it back on you. And I just feel like, being in barbershops, I became really good. It's like, oh, you got a girlfriend? I was like, nah, but who you talking to? And I'm just like, I'm trying to get like you, So you become so good at it, that, you don't even know that you're doing it. But I will say that it definitely is like a style of code switching.
Wow. The beauty of code switching.
Right. John, I'm going back to the PowerPoint. So I titled this Coming Out to Important People. I wouldn't say it's a theme, but he does talk about it. And the quote reads, "My mama went on to express disappointment about likely not having grandchildren anymore. I noted that technology could fix this, but she promptly dismissed it. After that phone call ended, I didn't speak to her for months. I imagine she worries about my health. I'm sure she felt that as a Black man in this world, I had enough problems. Why further complicate them?" I think that one of the things, I don't know if y'all have ever watched Master of None, but there is a fantastic episode that Lena Waithe directed about basically like her character it like comes out as a lesbian, and like how her mom like responds, and like she comes out and her mom's like, you know, the first thing she says is, you have it hard enough in this world as a Black woman. Why are you gay? And it reminds me of like my own experience, like coming out. I feel like something that is like in the past that has prevented my mom from just like being generally accepting is her worry as a parent. You know, I think, again, going back to like millennials and older, a lot of our parents lived through the AIDS epidemic. So they have this fear of, you know, oh my God, AIDS is rampant in the queer community, even though, you know, we have preventatives and we have incredible treatment. You know, I would like to believe that we're getting closer and closer to a cure, but, you know, I feel like for a lot of parents, especially Black parents, that's what they have in their mind of like, are they safe? You know, like, what if they get this? If they do, then their life is over. And it's like, no. And like I feel like you can relate to this because this is the work that you do.
Yeah, this is my life. My mother was a worrier. You know, it wasn't a religious idea of hers. You know, I wasn't going to hell. I think she was just really concerned about my own personal physical safety, and I also think about my happiness, like dealing with all those things. But yeah, it's the way it is. You know, just, you know, parents love their children, and sometimes that love does not square up the way you want it to be. You know, some parents like, oh, I want my son to be a doctor or a lawyer. And they're like, I want to be a circus performer. And, you know, they're still not happy. They're like, I'm not happy with this. You know, I'm worried you're going to be on the road. You know, you're on the trapeze. They make up these scenarios necessarily. And some might be rightfully unjust in their thoughts. But it is just always about that worry, you know. And then, as I said, I don't know about the religious aspect of it, of someone being like, you know, we're Christians and Christians don't do that. I never really experienced that, but I can imagine that's just even more tumultuous, because now you're like, mom and dad, I'm making them sad. And now my Lord, my Jesus, my God is mad at me too, you know? So just that compound of it. So I think, as I said, I've skirted a lot of these things that a lot of people go through that really hurt my heart. And I don't understand, but I do feel for them in those moments when it comes to, you know, this boy, Michael, having this mother who's religious, that loves him, but still just has these worries, and then the religious ideas on top of it that I think really can kibosh someone's spirit.
I try to have grace for my understanding of his mom in this moment, and I'll share why before anybody gets too mad. My 12th anniversary of being a dad is tomorrow, so it means that my oldest will be 12 tomorrow, and this peculiar thing that I couldn't have described or understood before being a dad, but it's like a part of my heart that used to live on my inside now walks around and does his own thing and likes magic tricks and my inclination is to do everything I can to help him. And when I'm at my worst, that looks like stopping the world from ever having a shot at hurting him, right? It looks like putting up every hedge, a conceivable hedge of protection, right? Like making sure that nothing bad can ever happen to him. But eventually you realize you can't do that. You can't. Old folks used to say, I'll beat you so the white men don't kill you, right? Like you can't protect people from what the world may or may not do to them, even if you love them, even if you want to. When I'm at my worst, I try to protect him from everything. When I'm at my best, I try to build him up to be a resilient young man, and to grow to be a resilient person who can overcome the things that are going to happen, the things that he is going to experience. But I have sympathy for caring so much about your child and just not wanting them to hurt and not knowing how to stop it and acting foolishly in the midst of those impulses.
So true.
You're gonna make me cry, Pastor Peter. That was so beautiful.
I
just want to hang out with y'all now. Whenever the live stream is done, we can just keep the conversation going.
And Kendra, we also wanted to say that Emily Zeke just said that Kendra's doing a great job. And so thank you so much, Kendra.
Going back, that may be the last part of the theme. Let me check. We may have like one or two more. Oh wait, that was it. Okay. So before I get into the recommendations, I do want to say, before I hand it off to Rex, thank you so much to everyone for coming and participating. Thank you for your comments. Thank you to Pastor Peters and Thera. Like, y'all are incredible. If you did read I Can't Date Jesus, or if you are intrigued to, here are a few other books that you may like. And the titles are How We Fight for Our Lives by Saeed Jones. Even if you don't read his book, you follow him on Twitter or social media. He is so funny. And then we have No Ashes in the Fire, Coming of Age, Black and Free in America by Darnell L. Moore. Fantastic book. Our next event will be on Thursday, April 8th, 2021 at 7 p.m. We'll be reading Surpassing Certainty by Janet Mock. And to continue to keep everything super fresh and fun, there will be a completely new panel and people discussing. So we do hope that y'all can come and read with us. And Rex, I'm going to pass it off to you.
Oh my gosh. Thank you, guys, so much. Thank you, Kendra. Thank you for everyone who tuned in and watched. This has been such a great conversation. I really appreciate all the comments, and just I could listen to y'all talk all night. So when you get together to hang out, I hope you'll invite me to come along. This was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. Everybody out there, if you have folks that you'd like to share this with, it's going to live on YouTube now. So you can share that link out. And if you have feedback about this or some of the other books that are coming up, feel free to send us an email at info@lgbtqcolorado.org. And I guess that's really it for tonight. What a great event. Oh, go ahead, Devin.
So I forgot to say this at the beginning, but we actually did get some recognition from Jordan Arceneaux. He responded to my tweet earlier today saying, honored that y'all chose I Can't Date Jesus. Thank you so much. Tell everyone I said hello and thank you. Also in my mind, Oprah is jigging to run on in that GIF because I attached a GIF of Oprah. Because I was saying how excited I was to be hosting, to be doing this.
Well, that was just the cherry on a fantastic cake of a wonderful event. So thanks so much.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
We hope